Standing on the promises, it will be all three verses.
Very good. Amen. Mr. Steinberg, would you like to open this thing up in a word of prayer?
Father, we thank you for allowing us another privilege and opportunity to be in your house. We ask that you be with us as we worship you in song. Be with Sister Cheyenne as she presents what you did in and through her down in Peru. And just help us to rejoice in all the things that you do for us. Thank you for your goodness to us. We ask for blessing on the rest of this service now in Jesus' name.
Amen. Well, I would love to allow you guys to sit, but the next song is number 159, again in the chorus book, On Christ I Stand, and we'll do all three of them. On Christ I Stand, song number 159. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest friend, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. A higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my solid rock I stand. When darkness seems to hide his face, I rest on his unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the veil. On Christ the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. A higher plane than I have found. On Christ the solid rock I stand. As we go on to the third verse, when we get to the chorus, the piano will drop out. We'll do it with just our voices on the third. When he shall come with trumpet sound, oh may I then in him be found, dressed in his righteousness alone, faultless I stand before the throne. On Christ the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. A higher plane than I have found. Christ the solid rock I stand. Very good. All right, you may be seated. If you'll now take out your hymnal, take the big one out. We'll go to song number 138. Song number 138. Now, the idea of those first two are standing on Christ. He is a solid rock. He's a solid foundation. But why? The pinnacle of our faith is Christ arose. Amen? Amen. All right, song number 138, Christ arose. We'll do verses 1 and 3. Very good. Now, if you look in either your hymnal or in the little thing in front, you should see the handout from last week, Stricken, Smitten, and Afflicted. A little insight. After this week, for the month of February, Mr. Jim Wood will be taking over song leading, and we'll pass it off next month. So today, we're probably just going to do verses 3 and 4, and then if he chooses to continue doing it, that's, if he would like to, we can. But I want you guys to get the full effect of this song. So we'll do verses 3 and 4. And again, when we get to the whole notes, it'll just be in a 2 count, and then we'll do the pickup notes as we continue going. Now, let's go on to Stricken, Smitten, and Afflicted, verses 3 and 4. Amen. Thank you, Pastor Cam.
Yeah, not that short. I don't know if I should be more insulted or if Cheyenne should be more insulted. Cheyenne has a lapel mic, so it's all good. All right, so I'm going to invite you to take your bulletins out for a minute. We'll go over a couple announcements together tonight. We're so thankful to have each one of you with us. I know it's hard a lot of times in the middle of the week, and I just want to say that I'm thankful that you are here. So still coming up this week, on Saturday, we do have our next men's and ladies' Bible studies here at the church at 8 a.m., so we're looking forward to that. And then coming up next week on Thursday, so a week from tomorrow, is the next ladies' Bible study down in Watertown. A week from this Sunday is February 9th. If you can believe, a week from Sunday will actually be the second Sunday in February. That's going to be the teen and young adult Super Bowl party at the Head to home. And we talked about a sign-up sheet. Is there a sign-up sheet, Kevin?
Yeah, sort of, but I think we forgot it.
Okay, yeah, sort of, but we forgot it. Okay, cool. All right, so a QR code will be sent out. Keep an eye out for that, just so you can RSVP for that event. Coming up on February 15th, we have quite a few events. Of course, Bible studies for men and ladies, as well as deacons meeting, ladies missionary meeting, and the ladies afternoon out in downtown Hartford. And then coming up on February 22nd is the Wisconsin State Youth Conference. If you would like to attend the Men for Christ rally for the men, ladies retreat for the ladies, registration is open for both of those. The church will reimburse you the base cost of it, so as long as you pay before the early bird deadline for your registration, the church will cover that. Not any housing or anything like that, but we will cover the registration cost of that. So we want to encourage you to go. If you have questions about the Men for Christ rally, you can come talk to me. For the ladies retreat, you can talk to Susanna Yogerst. And I think that's all we're going to cover. Today is our last Wednesday of January. Our others offering has been for our camp scholarships this month. So that'll be our last day for that. We'll have our men come forward as we go to take our offering, and I'll ask Ray when you get here to pray for our offering tonight.
Father, we thank you for, again, your goodness to us. We ask your blessing on this offering. We thank you that we have the opportunity to take up funds to help out those who are going to camp, and we pray that this will be a profitable camping season for them, that you would speak to hearts as they go there, be with the speakers, and just grant safety to those that are traveling and all those that have a part in these camps. And we just pray all this in Jesus' name now. Amen.
Ashley, at this time, we'll pass it over to Cheyenne. She's going to give us an update on her trip that she took this past year, as well as a few other things, I suppose. So Cheyenne, can you come?
Great. Well, hello to each and every one of you. Good evening. First off, I want to say thank you so much to Pastor for allowing me the opportunity to present on my trip finally. It just because of my things in my personal life, as well as our crazy schedule here, nearly a year has passed, and here we are finally presenting on a trip that you guys were so precious and wonderful to help support me in. I do really want to start off with thanking you guys for not only your prayer and financial support, but all of the encouragement that you gave me on that trip. There were so many times where people were reaching out to me, texting me, messaging, just saying, hey, praying for you, how are you doing, hope everything's going well. And they were in really key moments, and it was so wonderful for me to know, even though I was like 5,000 miles away, my church family here was still thinking about me and praying for me. Andrew Fuller, who was a very close friend of the missionary William Carey, said once that the relationship between a supporting church and a missionary is like a person exploring a mine shaft and being held up by the ropes of his friends. That is, the missionary is the explorer that's going down into the mine shaft. And the only reason that he is not falling is because he's being held up by those ropes, by the friends who are up above and left behind. And that's really what the relationship between a supporting church and the missionary is. The missionary is away, out of sight, out of mind, doing what the Lord has called them to do. And yet, the church that's left behind really is the one who is holding the ropes, making sure that missionary does not fall. And it's really not until you go on a missions trip, especially by yourself, that you recognize how precious those prayers are. So thank you so much to each and every one of you for that. It was a treasure and a joy to go down there to not only serve the Lord, but also to represent all of you in that ministry as well. I want to start off with kind of a little bit of background to how I got here, how I ended up going on this trip in the first place. Back in 2019 and to 2020, you guys supported me on a year-long missions trip to Peru while I was in college. While there, I did a foreign exchange trip program / missions trip where I got to really explore a lot of Peru. The Lord was really gracious in that. Super exciting, and that trip really changed my life. I was not really, how do I put this? Before going on that trip, I was not focused on missions whatsoever. I was planning on being a teacher in a public school, and while missions was important, it certainly was not something that I felt like the Lord was calling me to do at that time. And yet, I ended up going on this trip, and the Lord really transformed my life there. While there, I ended up meeting a missionary by the name of Mr. Bob Watley, and was introduced to his Creation Museum ministry. And ever since then, I have had the desire to go back and just explore that ministry and see what the Lord is doing down there. Fast forward about 4 years, and the Lord gave me that opportunity to go and see that ministry completed, as well as take part in it. And I'm really excited to show you what exactly I did down there. Before I jump into the actual ministry there, I do want to introduce to you Pastor Bob Watley. And at the time, when I met him in 2019, he was an 89-year-old missionary. Now he's closer to 94, 95, suffering from cancer, and still a vibrant soldier for the Lord. I just kind of want to go back for a moment and kind of take you through time. At the age of 18, way back in the 1950s, he both got saved, got married, and then was shipped off to the Korean War within a matter of months. And because of that, it really changed his life. While he was away at the Korean War, he was ministering and witnessing to anyone and everyone, especially his fellow soldiers in arms, many of which who did not return back from the war with him. And the Lord was gracious enough to help or have him return back. While he was there, the Lord burdened his heart to go back to the jungles of Korea in order to share the gospel with the people that he had left behind. He had fought in the final battle in Hill 229, and it was just incredible to hear the stories. You think of like the major missionary stories of old, this guy fits into it. He has stories from all over the place, and his passion for ministry and his passion for the Lord is unmatched. I absolutely love the man. When he came back from Korea, though, he found out that Korea closed its borders to all foreign missionaries, all foreign visitors, really. And so he was not allowed to go back. So he and his wife ended up joining Baptist Mid-Missions, and Baptist Mid-Missions asked if he would consider going to the Peruvian jungles instead to be a church planter, to which they greatly and quickly answered that call and went there instead. Really cool thing, he ended up being a missionary church planter for over 60 years in Peru. He started in the jungles and then ended up in the Cusco region, which is where I ended up working in. Just kind of a side note, the verse in Revelation, I want to say it's either 20 or 21, that talks about there's going to be members of every tribe and tongue and nation at the feet of Jesus worshiping him someday. It's because of people like him who answered the call to do that. He went to tribes in the jungle that now no longer exist or no longer have contact with the outside world. And there are believers in those tribes because of him this day. So again, such an inspiration to see. So why in the world do I bring him up? Well, during his 60 years of ministry in Peru, he had always been collecting artifacts, had been collecting fossils, and was really just awed at what in the world he was finding. He was finding like fish bones at 14,000 feet elevation in the mountains. He was finding sea turtle shells down in the Amazon basin, hundreds of miles away from the sea. To a secular scientist, that doesn't make sense, but to a biblicist, it makes perfect sense, especially when you believe in the account of creation and the account of the worldwide flood. And the Lord allowed him to use these artifacts throughout his entire time to witness to people and share the gospel with people that he otherwise would not have had the chance to do so. So he had this huge collection. He ended up coming back and was, wanted to do something with it. And the Lord really burdened his heart to continue using it for the Lord. Well, in 2015, he ended up having to come back to the States due to the health of his wife, and she tragically passed away in 2019. About the same time, the Peruvian government found out that he had a plethora of fossils and a plethora of artifacts and told him, you're not allowed to keep these. These are Peruvian property. These are not yours. And he was like, what if I put them in a museum? Will you allow me to keep them? And they said, sure, why not? So he established the Foundations Museum, or El Museo Fundamentos. And this is where I got to spend 6 weeks serving in, as well as some other places that I'll get to talk about here. When I first saw this museum back in 2019, it was this little 2-story sod house that was literally no bigger than the stage. And it was chock full of artifacts. And me, as the history geek that I am, was absolutely in love with it from the moment that I laid eyes on it. Now, going back to it 5 years later, it has turned into a beautiful museum that is on display in the heart of Peruvian tourism in the mountains. And he has really laid out the museum in such a beautiful way for the gospel to be showcased. So as I start off here, I guess the question I know a lot of you are probably wondering is, why in the world would I go to a museum in the middle of Peru, especially when we have creation museums here, and what in the world does this have to do with missions? So to begin, Peru is a very Catholic nation. If you remember back from Pastor Stein's presentation, it is very Catholic. That is the state church, even though they have religious freedom. That's what pays the taxes. That's what is at every official event. That's what's taught in the public schools. They have to have a religion class, and it's usually the Catholic churches who teach it. You would think the Catholic Church uses our Bible. They should believe in creation. But they don't. They actually believe and teach evolution in their churches. They teach evolution in their schools. They teach evolution in the public schools, and it's pushed on by the Peruvian government as well, just as much as it is here. And so there's really no way, no source of information that showcases the truth outside of a gospel-believing church. And even the gospel-believing churches have a hard time grasping or giving out theological education in this realm because it's just so limited in their area. So the museum, the Foundations Museum, was really established not only to be a source of light and truth to unbelievers, but also to be a tool for theological education to believers and to surrounding churches in the country of Peru. So that's kind of the importance of it. To kind of give the layout, first off, as a side note, I've never been to the Creation Museum in Kentucky. The only one that I've ever been to is the Institute for Creation Research in Texas. So I'm not sure if it's the same layout. I think it is, but just kind of bear with me as I explain it. As you walk into this museum, it is a beautiful dichotomy side by side of the account of creation right next to the theory of evolution. And as visitors come in, they get to see, okay, here's the theory of evolution that you have been taught from the time that you could understand, science, really, alongside the story, the account of what the Bible says is true. What is our biblical foundation? And many visitors who come in, many of them would never grace the doors of a church, of a gospel-believing church. And so it's a very unique opportunity for visitors to come through from around the world to hear what the Bible has to say about the truth of where we come from. As we walk through, then, we get to showcase the account of the flood, showcasing not only the fossils that have been brought forth or collected by Pastor Bob Watley, but also showcase the evidence from places like the Grand Canyon, from Mount St. Helens, and the like, showcasing, hey, there really is evidence out here. It's not just a crazy theory. It's not just something that's written down in a very ancient book, but there is real evidence to showcase that this is a valid theory. As we continue through, we go to a room that showcases the Tower of Babel, and then we get to show them where their culture comes from. And as we continue through the museum, you get to this portion. That's the picture on the right here. And we start with what is their history as a Peruvian? Where do they come from? The Peruvian people are a very prideful people. They have a beautiful culture and absolutely gorgeous history. As a history geek, I absolutely adore it. They started in the mountains of Peru, which is the capital of the Inca Empire. If you've never heard of the Inca Empire, it was the Roman Empire of the Western world that completely was obliterated once the Spanish people came over. But this is where the Peruvian people come from, and they absolutely love their history. And so we walk them through their own history until we come to this room. And this room is my favorite room. It's a very simple room, but here we get to mold or meld the stories of the Peruvian history with the history of the gospel, or the history of the Bible. And we get to present to them, God has a purpose for you. God made you. He made you to share him with others, to love him, and this is why he died for you. And we get to share the gospel over and over and over with people who come through those doors. Because it's a museum, it's a tourist attraction, we are open to different schools who come through. So as you can see on the bottom, that was a public school class that came through and got to hear the gospel presented to them, when every day in the classroom they're hearing the theory of evolution. And it's really cool to see how the Lord really has used this museum in the lives of the visitors who come. The family that is in the picture above with me and the pastor of the church that I was serving in, they, Dina is the mom's name and Alexis is the dad's name. They both kind of grew up in church, but not really. Church was not a priority. Neither one of them, I don't think, really made professions of faith. But the first day that I was there, they came to the museum, had heard about it, and were like, yeah, let's go take a trip. They had the day off of school and decided to come and see what the museum was about. We walked them through. They had so many questions afterwards about the gospel, so many questions about the Bible, and they started coming to church again. And the very next weekend, they ended up coming to the church that I was serving in. And I don't know if they're still there right now, but it was a huge encouragement to me to know that this unique setup, this unique ministry is really reaching out and impacting lives in such a beautiful way for the gospel, to showcase his light and his truth. Obviously, so as museum responsibilities go here, I did have the special privilege of giving tours both in English and in Spanish. Again, this is a museum located in the tourist capital of Peru, basically, right along the Sacred Valley, which is right where the Inca Empire started, and then all the way to Machu Picchu. There's this entire valley that is just covered in tourism, and the museum's located right in that valley. So I got to speak with lots of different people as they came through the museum each day. The lady that I'm talking to, so you're thinking, this is crazy place to get up to. In order to get to this area, I had to take like 36 hours of travel by plane. Then you have to take a bus 2 hours over a 14,000 foot, what's the word I'm looking for? Pass, thank you, just to get down into the mountains, right? This woman was traveling by herself. She is a professor from the University of Florida, professor of art, I believe, had never read the Bible, had probably heard the story of creation, but had never really thought about it or so, and I got to take a tour with her and showcase to her, this is what the Bible has to tell you and then ended up sharing the gospel with her at the end. She was super receptive, and so it was just really neat to see, okay, people are really thinking about this and are open to what the Bible has to say in a very unique way. Not only did I get to do tours, obviously, in Spanish and in English, but then towards the end of my time there, I got to record a tour in English for them to use in the future. There's not people full-time at the museum who speak English, so when they do have tourists who come through, unless there's a tour guide who can speak English, those visitors kind of just go through by themselves and don't get, we are not guaranteed the opportunity to share with them the gospel. So we decided, hey, while I was there, let's take advantage of the opportunity, and I got to record a tour of the entire museum and then record sharing the gospel for them to use as they were getting ready for their international tourist season. The museum, while great, was not my only source of ministry down there. The museum is located on the property of a Baptist seminary that was also established by Pastor Bob Watley many years ago. The seminary was kind of in transition at the time. They were in the process of looking for a new director, and I was actually supposed to teach a class while I was there. However, because they were in process of doing everything, or looking for this director, I was not, they didn't have as many kids come that year. So because of that, my class actually got nixed. I was not super disappointed about that. The class I was going to have to teach for 3 weeks, all in Spanish. And while I am fluent in Spanish, I don't speak it consistently. And I was a little bit concerned about, how I would be presenting myself in the classroom. But the Lord, in his beautiful timing, really used it appropriately. Instead of teaching, I ended up being a teacher's aide in the other 2 classrooms that were going on. One professor had a lot of health issues and was not able to really do all of the responsibilities in his classroom that he needed to do. For example, grading all of his papers that he needed to do, being there for all of the tests. He also was a pastor in the area, had to return back to his church that was 8 hours away every weekend. So I was able to fill in those missing gaps for him. The other teacher is taking graduate work at Faith Baptist Bible College in Ankeny, and so he was doing a lot of online work at the same time and also didn't have time to do a lot of the grading. So I got to help them in that way, just to be an extra person to stay on top of all of the responsibilities in their classrooms. Additionally, with seminary life came lots of opportunities to counsel and just pour into the lives of the students there, particularly the girls. There were 7 girls on campus that year, and I got to spend time with them in evening devotions. We went through the story of, or the account of Deborah in Judges, and show them that, hey, you can be a courageous person as a woman and live for the Lord even though it's difficult in our day and age. I also got to spend lots of one-on-one time counseling these girls. It is incredible to see the amount of just different struggles that they go through. I mean, all of us do, right? And I was really humbled to be used in that way. I never really have had the opportunity to do a lot of counseling before then. I was not a counseling major in college, never really thought that's what the Lord wanted me to do. But there is an enormous need for this in Peru, specifically in the mountains. So it was really neat to see the Lord give me opportunities to counsel and to pour into the girls. A third area of ministry while I was there was obviously church ministries. You can't very well be a missionary and not be part of a church. That's not super biblical. So instead, I ended up being part of I served in 6 different churches in 6 weeks. That was not necessarily a different church every week, but at least a different church. I ended up being part of 6 different churches while I was down there. The most prominent ones that I was part of was one church in a neighboring town called Yucay, and then one in Urubamba. The one in Yucay was a church plant started about 3 years ago by a graduate of the Bible seminary. Yucay is a very interesting town. It is very, 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 very Catholic. And when I say Catholic, I'm not talking about the Catholic that we think here. The Catholic Church in Peru, especially in the mountains, is a mixture of the Catholic Church as well as the spiritual animism that their tribes and Inca ancestors have worshipped over the years. And so they melded them together over the years and have created an interesting religion that they now practice. Well, Yucay is so adamantly Catholic that they usually kick out any other church denomination within a matter of weeks. And this church has been around for 3 years. Just an amazing testimony to the faithfulness of God. Despite being there for 3 years, there's only about 7 consistent church members who come faithfully every single Sunday. I did see as many as 15 come, but there was about 7 of them who faithfully came. It was a huge reminder of how I grew up. I grew up in a church of only about 10 to 15 people. And yet, even though it's a small congregation, the Lord is still present and still working, and that was really special. You'll see on there that I'm surrounded by a piano a lot. The Lord allowed me to use my musical abilities in order to serve him. This church did not have a piano player. They didn't really have any musical people. And so I got to use my time there by not only playing piano for the church services, but we also used it as an opportunity for an outreach in the community. Before church services on Sunday mornings, as well as on Tuesday nights, we offered free music lessons to anyone who would come. That's partially why Dina and her daughter ended up coming, because they wanted to learn more about piano, which is what I ended up doing every single week that I was there. It was really cool to see how the Lord used that. We didn't have too many people come right away, but it at least got the name out there. And again, that church is still going despite the government's threat to kick them out every single time. On Sunday nights and Wednesday nights, I served at the church in Urubamba. The church in Urubamba was also established by Pastor Bob Watley many years ago, but they are currently in transition and did not have any musicians as well. So on those evenings, I got to play piano for those church services and really help their music department grow in confidence more than anything. They had, I think, 2 people who played guitar and 3 people who played violin, but all who were probably high school age or younger. And so, try to put yourself in the steps or in the shoes of a high school student. Playing in front of a church of 100 people can be a very terrifying experience. So it was kind of interesting to see their process and how everything worked. A lot of them were very scared to play in front of people, and so it was humbling to me to be an encouragement to them as I got to play alongside them. I'm not going to mention all of the churches that I was a part of, but I do want to mention these 2 because they're very special to my heart. The 2 churches in Lima that I got to participate in was the church family that I got to serve in 2019 to 2020, as well as their daughter church. Many of you will recognize that 2019 to 2020 was kind of a year that kind of shook the world, and that was my world included. When COVID hit, I was suddenly taken out of the country without a chance to say goodbye to any of my friends, any of my church family. I kind of just disappeared off of their radar. And that really affected me harshly. And I struggled for a long time trying to figure out, Lord, I have this desire, I love these people, and I never got to say goodbye. And the Lord was so gracious to give me the opportunity to come and say hello again and then participate in their services. While there, they had VBS going at their daughter church. So like the day that I showed up, so I showed up at like 10 o'clock on like a Thursday night. And Friday, my pastor's wife is telling me, hey, do you want to come and help in VBS at this church? And I'm like, sure, I haven't spoken Spanish in 5 years, but why not? And I ended up directing games and helping out with the Bible lesson, which it was a little terrifying, but we got through it. And again, just a really special time to serve with them. The other church that was really special to be a part of was the church in Kiteni. Kiteni is the church where Pastor Bob Watley's son and daughter-in-law, Tim and Barbara, are. Tim and Barbara were the couple that really hosted me, for lack of a better way to put it, while I was there. My family and I have prayed for them for years. My parents have really supported their church work in Kiteni, and so it only made sense for me to be able to go and visit them. Kiteni is located 8 hours away from Urubamba, down in the jungles. It's 8 hours away, but it's only 180 miles. That's how bad the roads are to get there. But while I was there, I got to meet this young lady. Her name is Abigail. She is a 14-year-old daughter of the pastor, and she is their only piano player. She has had no formal training. She has an incredible ear, and is literally just teaching herself by whatever means she can get a hold of, whether that is YouTube, whether that is taking the hymn book and trying to figure out the notes, or whether that is taking time with anyone that comes through and knows anything about piano. So Barbara had asked if I would be willing to spend some time with her. We ended up spending, I think, like 5 or 6 hours Saturday night just going through, hey, these are just different ways that I play the piano, different ways that I play different hymns. You would think that's not super impactful, but for her it really was, because this is the way that the Lord has allowed her to minister. Not only that, but it was really a reminder of where the Lord has brought me. The only reason that I play piano these days, or the only reason that I got into playing was piano, I should say, was because my church didn't have a piano player growing up, and the Lord burdened me to do that very same thing. So I started teaching myself piano until my parents figured it out and were like, hey, we need to get you a piano teacher. We did not have a piano in my house, and so I learned piano from a wonderful pastor's wife in the area, and I was able to take her skills that she taught me and teach it to Abigail. I got to share that testimony with my piano teacher when I went back this summer, and it was so cool to see how she just lit up. To think that a piano teacher in the middle of nowhere, South Dakota, taught this girl who now is teaching this girl in the middle of the jungle in Peru the very skills that we all use to glorify God, was a really incredible thing to be a part of. That kind of wraps up the trip in 6 weeks. There was a lot of things that happened that I could get into and tell you story after story after story, just how the Lord really worked in my heart and in my life. Probably the biggest thing that I was struck by was the way that the Lord used every single one of my skills in order to serve him. Whether that was my musical abilities, whether that was my Spanish abilities, my teaching abilities, my counseling abilities, just listening to people. Even so far as I got to bake for different situations, that we had different meetings going on at the seminary and I got to bake for them, all the way down to even my building knowledge at one point was called upon. And it was like, wow, okay. God really does use every aspect of you when you are serving him. So that really brings me to my future plans. A lot of you are really wondering about this and have asked me time after time and again, like, are you going back? What are you going to do? To kind of like jump into this, I want to kind of back up and explain to you how in the world I got here. Ever since I was a little girl, I've always wanted to be an archaeologist and professor of history. I told you early on I did not want to be a missionary, not that that was bad by any means, but it's not what I felt the Lord calling me to do. Always wanted to be an archaeologist and professor of history. Well, you wanted to be Indiana Jones? Yeah, something like that. I think Pastor Cameron told me once that, no, she's not Indiana Jones. She's South Dakota Shy. I was like, okay, sure. So absolutely loved that, and that I was obsessed with that for a lot of my growing up years. When I got into high school, the Lord really burdened my heart, convicted my heart while I was at Bible camp and said, Cheyenne, that's your dream. That is not mine. I have something else for you. And I had to give it over to him and say, all right, I may never do this again, but that's okay. And I gave him a blank slate. I wrestled with it a lot, but I finally, at the end of that week, gave him a blank slate and said, Lord, I'll do whatever you want me to do. So I ended up going to Maranatha Baptist University studying social studies education because I really loved teaching. I really do think that is the spiritual gift that the Lord has given me. And I was able to learn more about that, really hone in on my skills with that. And it's been incredible to see how the Lord continues to use that. While I was in college, though, the Lord opened up the opportunity to go on this incredible trip to Peru for the first time. And I'm thinking, why in the world would he have me go here? And that's where I met Pastor Bob Watley and his Creation Museum ministry. While I was down there, we're in this room, again, this room that's no bigger than this stage up here with 7 of us for 3 hours. And Pastor Bob Watley is going story after story after story about all of these different fossils, how he found them, how they got there, and how God used that fossil to allow him to share the gospel with somebody else. And I'm just enraptured. And he gets to the end of, all these stories, and he looks at all of us and he says, now I'm 89 years old. I'm not going to be around much longer. I need somebody to take over this ministry. And all of my teammates, there were about six or 7 of us, they're teasing me, Cheyenne, you should go do this, you should go do this. I'm like, it's not for me. I gave that up to the Lord, and there's no way I can go back. And the Lord convicted my heart that night in a Wednesday night meeting. I had this little girl sitting next to me who was just distracting me like crazy. But the Lord got a hold of my heart and said, Cheyenne, if you allow me, I will do the impossible. I was like, okay, sure. So the next day, we're getting ready, we're packing up, getting ready to leave Otabamba. And I go up to Pastor Watley and I say, Pastor Watley, I don't know what the future holds. I have 2 more years at Maranatha. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm interested in this ministry. I would like to know more about it and keep tabs with it. And he said, sure, not a problem. We'll just keep in contact. I was like, great, cool. That was in August of 2019. I was still in Peru for another 6 months, and I never spoke to him again. Kind of lost track of the ministry. Came back from Peru after falling in love with this beautiful country and this beautiful ministry, and didn't know what was going on with the museum. The missionaries didn't reach out. I had no way of really contacting Grandpa Watley. That's how I affectionately refer to him as. And I started dating this guy who was super passionate about ministry in Alaska. And I was like, all right, the Lord is opening this door. And he was really showing us, our paths were going together, until one day he looks at me and he says, Cheyenne, and I had wrestled with this up to this point. I finally had given over the museum and going back to Peru to the Lord and said, all right, I'm going to Alaska. And my boyfriend comes to me and he says, you're content on going to Alaska, and I'm really okay with that. But if by going to Alaska, are you being taken away from a ministry you're supposed to be doing? And I look at him all confused, and I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And he looks at me and he says, well, what about this museum in Peru? And I'm like, why are you bringing that up? It's been like 1.5 years, almost 2 years at this point, since I had visited the museum. Had no idea what was going on. By that point, just lives had changed, and there were people that were involved in the museum that I thought it was totally taken care of. And I was like, nope, I'm totally fine. And I kid you not, the very next day, Barbara Watley, Grandpa Watley's daughter-in-law, reaches out to me on Facebook and says, Grandpa Watley hasn't spoken your name in 1.5 years. And all of a sudden, he's coming to us and saying, we need to get Cheyenne down here. I want her to come down here. I want her to help with this museum. And I told him, you were in a serious relationship. It needed to be your understanding, your decision. But I wanted to tell you, there's still a spot for you if you would pray about it. And I was like, oh my word, no, this is not happening. This is not how the Lord works at all. So I went to my boyfriend a few days later with that information, and I said, we're not breaking up over this, but we are going to pray about it. And the Lord ended up showing us that, no, he had a different path for each of us. So fast forward then to the end of college, and I kept pushing that door open. And I was like, all right, if I really am going to go to Peru, I need to pay school debt off. I really need to, make this happen. So instead of going into teaching right away, I started working at Zern's Building Products. And I told myself, and I told the Lord, I will be at Zern's Building Products until my school debt is paid off, and then we'll see. And at that time, I was thinking, all right, it's going to be about 5 years. I was looking at kind of my budget and everything right before Christmas. And I was like, all right, this is really cool. I can pay off my school loans, hopefully, by the end of this year. And so that means I'm going to be getting ready to go again. And I get this call about 2 weeks ago from a very special friend and mentor who tells me, I want you to go to the mission field. And I want to get you there faster. I'm going to pay off the rest of your school loans. And I got that check in the mail this week. It's really exciting to see the Lord work. So that means that I'm here, and I'm not sure what the Lord has as far as a timeline, but I know that it is coming a lot faster than what I was anticipating. My desire is to go back so badly, and not only work in this museum, but work in this ministry, work in the counseling and pour into the people at this seminary, to pour into the people at these churches, and to really see what the Lord can do here. Did not expect to cry, sorry. So, I have one request from all of you guys as I wrap up. And I'm going to warn you, the deacons don't know about this. I'm sorry. In order for anything to happen, it's got to be an official vote and things like that. And I'm not asking for that right now. But what I am asking for you to do, you have supported me the last 2 times that I've gone down there. I am asking that you would seriously consider praying about sending me. Not just supporting me like every other missionary, but partnering with me by being my sending church and sending me down there. And if it doesn't happen, that's okay, because the Lord knows. But as of right now, I keep pushing this door open. And biblical missions say that a church is the one who sends their missionaries out. I can't do it alone. I cannot be there as the Lone Ranger just doing all of this. And even if I do go with your blessing, God is still the one that's working in everything. So I don't want to leave all y'all, but it would bring me no greater joy than to be sent out by the very people who have loved me so well over the past 5 years. That is something that I want you to seriously consider praying about as we figure out what that means. Because Pastor Cameron has never been a pastor of a sending missionary or a sent missionary, and this church has never sent a missionary before. So we have a lot of details to figure out. But I do want you guys to be praying about it. So with that, we have a few minutes left for questions, if there are any, and I would be more than happy to take them. Any and all, whether it is future plans, whether it is Peru, whether it was my trip this time, my trip before, the floor is yours, and I'll see what I can do in answering them.
How did you learn Spanish?
How did I learn Spanish? Oh, goodness. So that was an interesting thing. I started learning Spanish when I was 5 years old at a charter school. Learned it for about 2 or 3 years while we were there. And then in high school, I had the opportunity to take it for 3 years. Absolutely fell in love with the language. It came super easily to me. And then in college, I really wanted to continue with it, but my major was too big to have a minor with it. So I couldn't fit it in, anything like that. One day, I was doing a State Street ministry, which was a ministry where we go out to the Madison State Capitol, and we street witness to people. And I'm with my partner, and actually, if you guys remember Alex Boyle, that's who I was with. And we're going up and down, cannot find anyone. Everyone we pass by that day is super busy, and just not taking the time of day. We finally find somebody who's sitting in a bus depot, and we walk up to him and start talking to him, only to find out that he only spoke Spanish. And it was at that moment that the Lord convicted me and said, Cheyenne, you've taken Spanish for 3 years, and you don't know how to share the gospel. You need to fix that. I was like, all right. So the next day I walked into registrar's office and added a minor for Spanish to that. But it really wasn't, so I took 2 more years in college, and then it really wasn't solidified until I went down to Peru for a year. I ended up living with a Peruvian family and had to use Spanish all the time and was forced to really become fluent in it. Wow, this is really intimidating to be up here. Now I understand everyone else.
So if you're involved in the ministry of the museum, is there any other education or learning that you would need to acquire in order to do that well?
Not officially, no, per the museum or baptism and missions. For myself, yes. This year, I'm actually planning to not only get some more training in biblical counseling, but also to start taking classes in and get more training in creation science through the Institute for Creation Research. I'm looking at a couple of trips to take going down to the Grand Canyon that is led by Institute for Creation Research scientists, as well as taking some of their classes online. None of that has to be completed before I go, especially because it is all online, which is really nice. But I do plan to do some sort of either a one-year certificate. Institute for Creation Research has everything from a one-year certificate up to a 4-year degree that I could get. I'm still going back and forth on which one would be best for me, but that is the goal.
So it seems like you figured out how to make 36 hours in a day on your last trip. That's what it sounds like from all the things that you did. Maybe you don't know the answer to this at all right now, but how similar is what you did on your last trip to what you might do going forward?
I would say it's very similar. What I got to do, this really was a survey trip for me to see what life would be like there. They constantly are in need of teachers. Unfortunately, because it is a seminary and me being a woman, I am very limited on what I can teach. But they are in a huge need for especially women mentors for their ladies. And so that would definitely be an area of ministry I would be in. I was told, so Tim and Barbara Watley's daughter and son-in-law are also going back as missionaries. And she told me before she left, I'm leaving all of my piano books. That way, if you get back to the mission field before I do, you can start teaching piano to everybody who keeps asking. And I'm like, oh, great. So I'm pretty sure I don't have a choice in that area. I will be teaching piano whether I like it or not. Music is a huge need down there, so I will definitely be ministering in that aspect. Lots of church plants in the area, so if I'm not in an established church, I will most likely be helping and serving alongside a church plant of some sort, as well as the museum. Miss Patty.
Are you going to go and see the real creation museum and the Noah's Ark before you go down to Peru so you can compare them?
I would love to. I was actually thinking about that today, and I'm like, that really should be a goal of mine to do before I leave. So yes, that is becoming higher on the priority list. If any of you want to join me on any of these trips, you're more than welcome to, by the way. It's great to go and do them, but it's a lot more fun with people who come with me. So just a side note. Yes, Mr. Wood?
We've been to the Creation Museum as well as Noah's Ark, and we have books that we purchased that kind of highlights that ministry and shows different areas of it. Would you be interested in taking a look at those?
Oh, absolutely.
We'll bring them for you.
Thank you.
Would like to know how long you're going to be in Peru.
For as long as the Lord will allow. I'm not sure yet, and I have a meeting with Baptism and Missions next week when Mark comes up for recruiting at Maranatha. So I'm going to ask him kind of what the logistics are with Baptism and Missions. I do know that if I were to be a career missionary, I would have to go, before I even start deputation, I have to go do a week-long thing with them in July. But I'm not sure if I've missed the deadline or not. If I do short-term, I get there faster and I don't have to do that. So we're still trying to figure out if I am going to do short-term or long-term yet too. If I do short-term, I'll probably be there for at least 2 years before I come back.
What is something that God has taught you in this season of waiting and preparation that He's had you in for the past several years?
So probably the most recent one. In Ladies' Bible Study, we're going through the book of Genesis, ironically. And we just got done studying the life of Abraham, or most of the life of Abraham. And it was really cool to see. I had never noticed this before, but in the life of Abraham, God called Abraham out from his family and said, "Follow me." Abraham followed. And then several years later, he started telling him, "Hey, I've got this huge promise for you." But he doesn't really give any details. And then several years later, he says, "It's going to be through your direct descendant that you're going to have all of these descendants." And then it's several years later that he comes back and says, "It's going to be a son through Sarah." And then it's several years later that he actually has the child. I always thought that the life of Abraham kind of happened like, right then and there. That's not how it happens. It really happens in these spurts over the course of a lot of time. And it was really cool to see that comparison. The Lord brought to mind, after I had found out about my loans were being paid off, the Lord brought to mind Psalms 31:3, I think, that says, "For the sake of my name, I will lead and I will guide." And I think that's been the most prominent thing since taking this over. I didn't know when I went to Peru that this is what I was going to do. I didn't know when I gave up my plans when I was in high school that this is what I was going to do. I'm going to be really honest. Right before Christmas, I didn't know that this is what I was going to do, okay? And going to be completely honest, he could still change it. This is my desire right now. This is my goal. This is my plan. But that doesn't mean that that's what God's will is for my life, because it hasn't happened yet. It can still change. I guess to answer that question, be open, be flexible, and recognize that he's leading and guiding has been probably the biggest thing I've learned as I've put it all together. All right. On that note, I think I'll turn it back over to Pastor. Thank you. Just close this.